Hi there everyone, it's Joe and welcome to the very last instalment of the Starter Deck Re-volved series, at least until they release some more sets and some new starter decks. And we're going with the Final Fantasy XIII starter deck this time round. Now this deck is interesting because it's actually very slightly modelled on the winning deck from UK Nationals this year, as you'll see when we get into the deck list. But as with all of the Final Fantasy Starter Deck Re-volved series, there are only 2 hero cards in this deck so that the deck is as easy as possible for new players to make. So I would encourage all of you players out there that already play the game to share this out with new players or people who are looking at picking up the game. And there are 23 forwards, 18 backups and 9 summons, as with all of the other starter decks. So let's just get straight into the deck list. So as we go straight into the forwards, the first thing that you'll notice here is that Lightning isn't here. And unfortunately the reason for Lightning, well, not being here is because the starter deck Lightning just straight up isn't very good. It's unfortunate, and it's, you know, seeing as Cloud and Tidus were both pretty playable in their decks, but unfortunately Lightning isn't here. However, we're going to start off with the hero of the deck, and that's XIII. Now XIII has the ability to drag in other units with him. This deck is very much built around the mannequin units, so I wanted something big and beefy that can like get the whole deck going, and XIII does that with absolute aplomb, and he's very, very strong, so he's definitely a massive front runner, and Lightning doesn't have very many big hitters, so it works out well for him to be in this deck. And then the next card to follow him is a mannequin to go with him, which is Fleeting Flash. Now Fleeting Flash is a card that is just like not that great on her own, but the second you get out another mannequin, she's an absolute hard-hitting, hasty, just really strong unit. So while Lightning isn't in the deck herself, I mean, you get something pretty close to her. And then one of the other focal points of the deck, which does come from the starter deck, is Gilgamesh. Now Gilgamesh is just really, really strong in general, and he can make himself as big as you want him to. One of the primary reasons to use him, however, is the fact that he can't be returned to your hand by card effects, and water is actually a very, very popular element right now, so having that ability is actually quite relevant. And then Divider is just a really strong removal piece if you're being hurt, or if you're, there's something going a bit awry, then you're pretty covered. And then we have a 4th copy of Gilgamesh in here, primarily to help fuel the S abilities for the starter deck one. But honestly, this one, the morphing time is actually quite good anyway. So if you have a 4th copy of Gilgamesh, then I like to make it this one rather than the Strongest Sword Gilgamesh, which requires kind of a deck of his own as opposed to being just splashed in there. And then 2 copies of Ninja are in this deck, mainly to be a cheap unit, but honestly this Ninja should be played in a lot more decks than it currently is, because it has what is essentially Death Touch from Magic. So where we've kind of covered, red and green from Magic in the FF7 decks, we've kind of covered White Weenie Rush with FF10 and FF like Type 0. This is much more your blue-black control, and as close as you're going to get to that anyway. So I honestly, if this is the sort of thing that you like to play when it comes to Magic, then this is probably the deck for you. And then continuing on with that, we've got 2 copies of XIII. You could actually run 2 copies of the uncommon light or the rare Lightning in this slot if you really wanted to have a copy of Lightning in the deck, but XIII kind of does the job on its own anyway, and he's a lot cheaper, but you might want to benefit from the haste that Lightning brings. But I chose to have XIII in here because it's cheap and easy. And then lastly, we've got 2 copies of Ramza for the Lightning forwards, who is just a beat stick. He's massive. He gets big really, really quickly. We have Lulu, which is a power booster for Lightning in the deck. So if you have 5 backups in your back row, one of which is Lulu, then he goes up to 11,000 power just on his own, and that's just a really, really powerful card. So I definitely like to have Ramza in the deck somewhere. Moving into the Ice Forwards now, one of my absolute favourite characters in Final Fantasy history is Kuja, and everybody knows that, but Capricious Reaper is a pretty solid replacement for him, and he's seen play in a ton of decks. He was in the Nationals winning deck along with Fleeting Flash, and it's difficult to argue with why. It's just very good. 4 CP for an 8k body with the ability to make it so he's harder to target because he forces your opponent to discard cards whenever they try, and along with some of the other cards in this deck that discard cards from your opponent's hand, Capricious Reaper's just a great card. And then we're following it up with just a single copy of Semblance of a Gunslinger. Now Semblance of a Gunslinger isn't actually all that special, I just kind of wanted to round out the number of mannequins that were in the deck, and given that there's a lot of dull and freeze in this deck, you never know, there's a lot of situations where Semblance of a Gunslinger might actually put in a lot of work, and it's an on-curve body, so honestly you could change this card to whatever you wanted to. I just quite like having the extra mannequin in the deck. And then we're going with 2 copies of Serra. Serra is just a good card in most ice decks because it's just a free discard from your opponent's hand. And she comes in the starter deck, which is great. And she's just very, very good. So I'd run at least 2 copies of her. I wouldn't want a 3, but 1 or 2 is definitely a great choice in any ice deck, especially a deck like this. And then a single copy of White Tiger Lassie Kunmi, because honestly I love this card. It makes it so that your guys are extremely difficult to target with summons. She's only a rare as opposed to a hero or legend, and she just fits into this deck quite nicely. If you weren't going to run the Semblance of a Gunslinger, I would honestly advise a second copy of this particular card because it just wards your guys off from summons almost entirely. And then a single copy of Argeth because it's a cheap card alongside the ninjas from the lightning side of the deck that can just drop cards out of your opponent's hand. It's a great turn one play, and there are a lot of players that probably wouldn't play Argeth, but I think in a deck like this it fits very, very nicely. Moving into the backups now, this deck is more primarily focused on lightning than ice. There is actually a very, very easy way to turn this into a more primarily ice deck by way of things like Laguna and Squall and things like that, but I decided to go with the lightning aspects of the deck because it's more in tune with the starter deck in my opinion. So I decided to go with 2 copies of Lulu as opposed to 2 copies of Duke Larg. And you know, with Gilgamesh and X-Death and Fleeting Flash, things like that, it's a great offensive push, which is something that lightning is very good at, whereas ice is very, very good at keeping your health total safe. So honestly, I decided to go with a more offensive lightning build rather than the more defensive ice build. But there's no reason why you couldn't experiment and go with a more defensive ice build. Go do you try these things out. If you don't like my particular build, then hopefully it'll give you inspiration to build one of your own. So honestly, just go nuts and do what you want to do, but I've gone with 2 copies of Lulu here. And then with most lightning decks, 2 copies of Black Mage will always find their way in. This Black Mage in particular drops your opponent's power by 4k, which is fantastic if you've already hurt something, because obviously the way that power and damage works is if the damage that a forward has taken exceeds their power, they die. Which means if they've taken damage and you drop their power below that threshold, it will kill them. Very similar to how ---- works in Magic. Again, this is very, very black-blue, control, removal, that's what this deck is all about. And then 2 copies of Red Mage because it can give your guy haste, and honestly with cards like Gilgamesh or even cards like Serra and Argeth, giving them haste can actually turn the tide of the game. Giving it to Kate Sith can actually win you the game, which means that you don't have to play the 4 CP Lightning that was mentioned earlier. You can actually play a similar trick with Kate Sith. And then a single copy of Maki, mainly because it's in the starter deck and it's a nice 2 CP unit that can give your guys first strike, but it has to be a lightning and it has to be attacking. So do bear that in mind. You could drop this for a 3rd Red Mage if you wanted to, but I like having a single copy of it because it's a bit of variety. And then 1 copy of Seymour because it's further removal. It's just a unit that can come in, destroy something 3 CP or less, and then you carry on with your day. And then a single copy of Sage, and you could run a 2nd Sage instead of the Seymour if you wanted to. A lot of people run 2 Sage. I thought 1 was applicable here. You can run this just to, pick up any guy from your bin. You could pick up a Gilgamesh to trigger an S ability. You could pick up an X-Death after he's died so that you can play him again. There's lots of neat little tricks you can do with the Sages. Now going into ice backups, one of the strongest cards that's in the Final Fantasy XIII starter deck is Jill Nabat. Now, Jill's kind of fallen off play a little bit in recent months, but honestly the card is still very good. It's only because there are counters to being frozen that are more prevalent now than there were before that she's even fallen off a little bit, but the card is 2 CP, has an S ability that's relevant, does something pretty significant when it comes in. Honestly, just run 3 of this card if you're going to build a starter deck for FF13. She's just really, really good. And then 2 copies of Time Mage because making your opponent unable to attack you can slow them down enough for you to be able to build up the resources to either kill them or overpower them. It's just a very good 2 CP unit. As I've said with previous decks that I've built, I do try to keep the number of 2 CP backups in my decks as high as possible while not sacrificing the power from the other ones. So there's normally about 8 or 9 in most decks that I build. And then 2 copies of Devout, which is honestly one of the best backups that Ice has to offer. If we were running a more ice heavy deck here, then we would run 3 copies of Devout, primarily to pull out cards like Laguna and Squall as mentioned earlier. But honestly, 2 Devout here is perfectly fine. You can grab back Gilgameshes, you can grab back Fleeting Flashes, Capricious Reapers, all sorts of things that you realistically want to aim to be pulling back 4 CP units to try and make up for the cost of Devout itself. And then a single copy of Mog from FF13 because honestly I like to run at least 1 searcher in every deck that I play, and this one is no different. So honestly she can search up your Sarah, your Gilgamesh. There's lots of little things that she can search up. It doesn't have to be like hundreds of targets. As long as you've got at least 2, the search is usually worth it. And then lastly, a single copy of Summoner, because again, it'll ward things off on the defensive side of things. It'll cancel any summon, so if there's a Bahamut coming your way, you just go, nope, I don't want to deal with that. White Tiger Kunmi can do a lot of work towards that, but I like a single copy Summoner just for that absolute no. It's a counter, it's a cancel effect. Blue players in Magic will love a card like this. Going into the summons now, with Lightning, you're pretty simple just running copies of Odin, because Odin is just very, very good. There's multiple copies of him for different situations, and we've got for the 2 Opus 1 copies here. The first of which is going to be the one that destroys anything of 4 CP or less. It isn't EX burst, but it's just a really great card. And then secondly, we're going with 2 copies of the 7 CP Odin, which can kill anything and is an EX burst, but it costs 7 CP. So it's a nice way to teach people the balancing act between those two. Some people run 3 and 1 one way or the other. Some people run 3 and 3 if you want to be really adventurous and really heavy on the removal, but I've gone for 2 copies of each here. And then with the ice ones, I've gone with 2 copies of Matthias, because again, it's a really great removal card, and more importantly, it's a card that doesn't target. And any black player in Magic who knows about sacrifice effects and things like that knows how powerful effects like this can be. So honestly, 2 copies of Matthias to me is pretty mandatory here. We would play copies of Solera, but it's a hero card, unfortunately, and if I've set my rules, then I kind of want to be strict and stick to them, as I have done with every other deck that I've built so far under the Starter Deck series. So I'm going to go with 2 copies of Matthias here, and those 2 actually pair up very well together. So if you do build a deck like this, grabbing copies of Solera is still a good idea. And then 3 copies of Shiva, 2 copies being from Opus 3 and 1 copy being from Opus 1. The reason we're running 2 copies of the Opus 3 Shiva is because it can push you into the game win. If you've got a couple of guys out, you've got your Gilgamesh, you've got a haste guy in hand, and you just go, 2 of your guys are dulled or tapped or however you want to call it, and you just play you play Shiva, get them out of the way, play your haste guy, smack them for game. It's that simple. And then a single copy of the Opus 1 Shiva, because this was a more defensive play than offensive, but you can get a guy out of the way for 2 turns if you need to. Some people may choose to run 3 copies of the Opus 3 Shiva because it is a more offensive play, but I've tried to keep this as balanced as possible. So as you can see here, your early game plays are going to be cards like, Sarah and Argeth to try and bin your opponent's cards out of their hand, or just trying to build up a really nice kind of backup suite where if you can get Lulu down nice and quickly, that's always a bonus. And then your mid-game, you want to try and get down an X-Death fairly quickly with a Fleeting Flash or Capricious Reaper, so that you can start punching your opponent's head in pretty quickly, or failing that, you can play cards like Gilgamesh to kind of make it so your opponent doesn't want to attack you until you get to the point where you can push forward. And then late game, you're just going to be looking to punish your opponent with removal spells, X-Death and Gilgamesh and things like that. Those 2 cards are pretty much the core of the deck, so you kind of want to be focused on them. And that's it for the Starter Deck Re-volved series. This is the 5th of the Starter Decks, and that's the last of them. So with new sets coming out, these decks will obviously change. There's always going to be new cards being released, and there's going to be tons of Starter Decks. Hopefully with the longevity of the game, then it looks like we're going to get more Starter Decks, more sets. These things are always going to be changing and ever evolving. But as of Opus 3, these are the kind of ways that I would love people to start experimenting with the Starter Decks and seeing how they go from here. From here, I'm going to be posting up fan-submitted decks and stuff like that in the future, as well as some little brews of my own. So thank you very much for watching, and if you've liked what you've seen here, then do subscribe to the channel, and I will hopefully catch you guys later. So thanks again for watching. Bye.